The Atlantic has released the transcript of a group chat between top U.S. officials on Signal that inadvertently included its top editor. Joining us now is co-host of Balance of Power, Kailey Leinz. And Kailey, this is a story that I imagine everyone in Washington is focused on. But I think the broader question is, will there be any fallout, or is this just going to be a typical sort of Trump story that goes out of the news cycle in 24 hours?
Well, a lot of that depends on the decision-making of the president himself, to who this point, Matt, at this point, is still, as of this morning, even after the publication of this full Signal group text chain, has said he's standing by his team, that it was, yes, a mistake that this journalist was inadvertently added, but because the attack against the Houthis went off perfectly in his mind, that no harm was actually done here. That said, what we were hearing from the administration yesterday about the notion that no plans were actually shared, that there was no classified information on this group chat, is what the releases today put into question. The Atlantic had decided not to release all of this material on Monday due to national security concerns, but has now done so, detailing in full what the Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth posted at 11:44 a.m., which included specific times, specific military aircraft like F-18s or Reaper drones that were to be used to strike at different time periods, even mentioning a terrorist target at his known location. Now, what we're hearing from the administration is that this does not constitute quote-unquote war plans, as the Atlantic initially characterized, though a specific attack was mentioned. And we're seeing, once again, officials who were on this group chain, the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, and the CIA Director, John Ratcliffe, facing a second day of questions from members of the House Intelligence Committee after testimony in the Senate yesterday. That, no surprise, is getting pretty dicey, as the ranking member on the Intelligence Committee, Jim Himes, is suggesting that it's only an act of God that kept American pilots from dying as a result of this breach.
So, Kailey, if Trump is sticking by his team, are there any real consequences? Are there any mechanisms to have there be things like Pete Hegseth, for example, be forced to step down? Is there any other thing, be it the Senate, be it some of these lawsuits that are popping up, that could have that type of consequence, or does it all come down to Donald Trump?
A lot of it comes down to the decision-making of the president and whether he would request or accept a resignation letter from any of the individuals involved, be it Pete Hegseth or Mike Waltz, who, of course, claimed accountability and taken personal responsibility for starting this chain in the first place. We could see congressional investigations into this. Obviously, there is the testimony happening today, but we've also heard from the Armed Services Chairman in the Senate, Roger Wicker, a Republican, who has suggested he would like an inquiry. But it's unclear where that would actually lead, keeping in mind that there are Republican majorities in both the House and Senate who, by and large, stay in lockstep with President Trump. And if President Trump is signaling he does not want his people to go, it is seen as highly unlikely that anyone would cross him on that. I will say, you mentioned lawsuits, Danny. We did see a liberal group, American Oversight, filing a lawsuit against some of these officials yesterday over essentially the records acts that bind officials, because some of these messages in Signal were set to automatically delete, which they argue is in defiance of laws that require officials to keep records of their communication. So we could see some of this playing out in court. But by and large, the administration is really just hoping that this story eventually leaves the news cycle and they can move on to other things without any heads actually rolling.
Well, that's leaving the news cycle does really seem unlikely, considering the scope of what's been released. I mean, you can tie this to stories like Bradley Manning or Scooter Libby, right? Have any American lives been put at risk here? Have we seen any, CIA outings like Valerie Plame? Have you seen anything like that in this Atlantic release?
No, and I would point out, Matt, that the Atlantic still chose not to release the name of the CIA operative that the director, John Ratcliffe, had named as the person who would be his touch point for these conversations after a request from the CIA not to do so. That said, and what we are hearing from the administration is that there was no harm done here, that all of these attacks went successfully, they were not thwarted, and everybody got out safely. But what I've been hearing from people close to the intelligence community, others here in Washington who have worked in prior administrations and are familiar with security protocol, is about the future national security risks that it could pose, given that Signal is not a completely fully 100% secure platform. It is still vulnerable to hacks from American adversaries like Russia or China, also keeping in mind that this may call into question allies who intelligence share with the U.S., the so-called Five Eyes Alliance, for example, thinking of countries like the UK and Canada and Australia. Their fear is that it may cause other countries who provide the U.S. with valuable information to second-guess doing so because of concern over whether or not the channels are secure and whether that information will actually be contained. So what we're hearing from people who are upset by this episode is more about the longer-term risks, what it could jeopardize in the future, than necessarily what happened with this particular episode.